Tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern over on Jaguar 8, a new college football video drops. Also at 9 p.m. Eastern, join me live on Twitch where we'll talk about anything and everything in our weekly Q&A stream. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. There are many reasons why a team will draft a player. And usually, when the coach or the general manager explains after the draft why they made this pick, it's generic talk that you've heard before that means absolutely nothing. There's things like, he has a ton of potential. We like the way he interviewed and tested. He stood out on tape. He's a great fit for our scheme and for our system. He fills a need and we think he can start right away. He does this particular thing really well, and we need a guy like that. And there are about 100 other cliches and statements that will be made. Those cliches are not newsworthy in the slightest bit. But when a general manager and a head coach go against those cliches in the press conference and give a completely different reason as to why they made the pick, oh man, it can lead to some hilarious moments. It's the classic case of how dog-biting man isn't a story, but man-biting dog is a pretty big deal. And in 1981, let's just say that the Pittsburgh Steelers gave the stupidest reason ever for drafting someone. This is Pitt quarterback Rick Trocano, and he was chosen in the 11th round of the 1981 NFL Draft with pick number 292 by the Pittsburgh Steelers. And when talking about the pick, owner Art Rooney gave literally the worst and funniest explanation for why he was drafted. Because Rooney basically said on the pick, yeah, he's not very good. He's got heart, but he's actually a pretty bad player. And let's just say it's not a surprise after that ringing endorsement that he did not make it with the Steelers. This is the story behind Rick Trocano and what might have been the funniest draft pick in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise. Before I talk about the actual pick in question and what was said by the team as to why they drafted him in the first place, we need some context to understand just who Rick Trocano is, and how well he was playing in college. During the 1970s, life was very good if you were a fan of the Pittsburgh sports teams. The Steelers were in the midst of their incredible dynasty, where they won 4 Super Bowls in a 6-year stretch. The Pirates won the NL East 6 times, and won the World Series twice. And the same applied to the Pitt Panthers, who were one of the best teams in all of college football. Obviously, they won the Sugar Bowl in 1976 to be declared the national champions after a perfect 12-0 season, and they finished 8th in the AP poll the following year when they won the Gator Bowl and finished 9-2-1. But in 1979 and 1980, they were also incredible. They won 22 out of a possible 24 games, and in 1980, finished the season ranked number 2, with some publications even picking them that year as the national champion. So who was the man quarterbacking them for those seasons around the turn of the decade? That would be the man you've been watching this whole time. Rick Trocano lost his starting job at one point because of the addition of a newcomer by the name of Dan Marino, who would only wind up becoming one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the sport. However, after Trocano got moved to the secondary to play the safety position, he got moved back to quarterback after Marino suffered a knee injury. Under center, Trocano won games at will, as in his 28 starts at the quarterback position, he went 23-5. And to some extent, he was an instrumental part in the success of the team. When you play the most important position on the field, you don't win over 82% of your games by complete accident. He finished his career with 4,219 passing yards, which at the time was the school record for most career passing yards. His 4,892 yards total offense ranked second in school history at the time, only behind Tony Dorsett, who had a commanding hold on first place at 6,526. As a side note, to learn more about the career of Tony Dorsett in the NFL, click the card in the upper right corner. And he ended his career on an incredibly high note, as in a convincing 37-9 victory over South Carolina in the 1980 Gator Bowl, Trocano was named the MVP of the game for Pitt after throwing for 155 yards and a touchdown, while also picking up a rushing touchdown, as his rushing touchdown was the first score of the game, with Pitt never relinquishing the lead from that moment on. Now that his college career was done, that raised the next logical question. Where would he wind up in the NFL? Well, not a whole lot of teams viewed him pretty highly as an NFL quarterback. Every single pre-draft workout he had, minus the one he had with the Pittsburgh Steelers, had him playing a bit of safety, where he started off the 1980 season before Marino got hurt. It was more likely that he would have to start off in the Canadian Football League, with Pitt head coach Jackie Sherrill thinking he'd be better off there, both from a chance to make the roster and from a chance to make more money and continue his professional football career. And there were a few reasons why his NFL prospects were looking slim. Number 1, there was his height. He was only 6 feet tall. The prototypical NFL quarterback in the early 80s was 6'3". If you weren't above 6 feet at minimum, you were more than likely not going to pan out. For some perspective, in 1980, There were 16 quarterbacks that threw for at least 3,000 yards. All 16 of them were above 6 feet. Trocano was entering the NFL at a significant disadvantage from a height perspective, which obviously was completely out of his control. But it's not like the numbers were that impressive either. In his 4 seasons at Pitt, he threw 23 touchdowns and 41 interceptions. Having a touchdown to interception ratio somewhere in the ballpark of 1 to 2 is not good, especially in college, where the competition is significantly weaker than the competition you'll face in the NFL. Not once in his 4 seasons did he have a year where he threw more touchdowns than interceptions. He was incredibly turnover prone. He threw a pick once every 12 passes in his senior season. He didn't have a whole lot of zip on his football. He didn't have great speed to overcome this, as he ran a 4.8 at the 40-yard dash. And his accuracy, while not bad by the standards of the late 70s and early 80s, wasn't anything remarkable, especially going deep. If you looked at his collegiate career, took those numbers, and put them in as an NFL passer rating, since the NFL and the NCAA have 2 different metrics for evaluating passer rating, you would get a career passer rating for Trocano of 58.3. And for some perspective on that, in 1980, amongst all 30 qualified quarterbacks, the one with the lowest passer rating in the NFL was Phil Simms, who was at 58.9. That means that Trocano, against college competition, had a worse passer rating than any NFL quarterback. So you can only imagine just how bad he would be against NFL competition. To make a long story short, Trocano wasn't exactly projected to go very highly in the draft, and it's not too hard to see why, even though he won all those games. To some extent, and I emphasize the word some here because I mean no disrespect whatsoever, this feels like a Jimmy Garoppolo situation, where yes, he's winning games, but it's not really because of him, and the team is looking to replace him with a better option. With Garoppolo, it's Trey Lance, and with Trocano, it's Dan Marino, as evidenced by the fact that after a top 10 season where Pitt went 11-1, they literally moved Trocano away from quarterback and to safety. However, when the 1981 NFL Draft rolled around, even though Trocano had to wait a really long time, he would eventually hear his name get called. And fortunately for him, he didn't have to move too far or get adjusted to a brand new environment. Because in the 11th round, with pick number 292, the Pittsburgh Steelers made Rick Trocano the 12th quarterback taken off of the board, and decided to make him a member of the Steeler family. And their explanation for why they did this is absolutely hysterical. Now, before I talk about the comment in question, I have to mention 2 key things. Number 1, Rick Trocano was absolutely thrilled to be staying in Pittsburgh and to be drafted by them, even though he grew up a Cleveland Browns fan. He could not have been more grateful for the opportunity, and even cried tears of joy after hearing the announcement. He said that he was praying to God that the Steelers drafted him, and after this became official, he said, "I couldn't be happier. I told my parents that after playing 4 years in Pittsburgh, I'd hate to leave. Now, I don't have to. I consider myself a part of the family. The Steelers have become my team. My main goal now as a rookie is just to make the team. I'll play on special teams if that's what they want me to do." Trocano was a guy who definitely had his head on straight, and who genuinely seemed like a nice guy. And yes, he knew that his odds of making the roster were pretty slim, as the Steelers already had 3 quarterbacks who were pretty much locks to make it with Terry Bradshaw, Cliff Stout, and Mark Malone, their first-round pick from 1980. But he was more than willing to do whatever it took to make it. And number 2, in no way whatsoever am I criticizing the Steelers for drafting a guy like this in the 11th round of the draft. The 11th round is a complete crapshoot. If a guy even makes it into the NFL, it's a remarkable feat. Of the 28 players taken in the 11th round in 1981, 17 of them, or over 60%, never even played it down in the NFL. Only one of them wound up becoming a starter, with that being Bengals defensive back Robert Jackson. When you're drafting in the 11th round, especially back then, you're drafting guys based on potential, or you're drafting guys that you're familiar with. So let me preface what I'm about to say on Art Rooney and the Steelers organization with that. On its own, criticizing an 11th round pick is ridiculously stupid. If you're going to be that pedantic and that petty, you need a pretty valid reason to do that. However, I'd say that this qualifies as a pretty valid reason. Art Rooney was the one who made the pick. He usually had the tradition of making the final pick in the draft for the Steelers, and because the Steelers didn't have a 12th round pick that year, this selection at pick number 292 was the last time that the Steelers were on the clock. So when Rooney explained the pick in the press conference afterwards, he should have had a pretty good explanation as to his thought process. At the very least, an explanation that was not this. Because when Rooney explained why he picked Trocano, his explanation was, For some reason, oh, we don't think he can play. We don't think he's that good. As Rooney said on Trocano, in one of the most insane explanations I've ever heard for why a guy got drafted. All I know is that there was a guy named Bill Dudley. He couldn't pass, and he couldn't run, and he couldn't kick. But he had heart, so he could win. I'm sorry, did you just compare Trocano to a guy that, by your own admission, couldn't play? Did you just admit that the guy you just drafted was not very good? I'm going to dive into why this statement is laughably bad, but I should also note that Chuck Noll echoed very similar thoughts, as not once did he ever speak about anything tangible that Trocano did well. All he talked about was that he won. He spoke in buzzwords. And when one writer countered and questioned the logic here by saying that the Steelers already had 3 pretty good quarterbacks, Rooney had no answer. Rooney drafted a guy at the position that he didn't need that, by his own admission, was not good. If you're drafting a quarterback and you're comparing him to a guy that can't pass the football, I don't even know what to say to that. Furthermore, everything that Rooney said about Bill Dudley was wrong, so it's not even like this comparison was very accurate. Number 1, Dudley was a Hall of Famer. Yes, he wasn't the strongest or the fastest or the most athletic player in the world, but he could still play. You don't become a Hall of Famer and do the things that he did purely off of heart. Dudley was the first overall pick in the NFL draft. You don't become the first player chosen solely off of heart. You're saying Dudley couldn't run? He literally led the league in rushing yards twice. You're saying Dudley couldn't kick? He led the league in field goal percentage in 1951 by hitting 76.9% of his kicks, and became literally the first player in NFL history to have a season where he hit over 75% of his field goals. I've got a ton of heart. There's no way I'm ever going to be setting the NFL record for field goal percentage, and there's no way that I'm ever going to lead the league in rushing yards twice. And Art Rooney was the owner of the Steelers in 1942 when Dudley got drafted. If by your own admission, you drafted a guy first overall that you didn't think could play, what the heck does that say about you? And to go even further than that, Rooney said that Dudley and Trocano were similar because just like Dudley, Trocano was a winner. There's just one small problem. Yeah, Dudley was not a winner. He was the exact opposite. He played 3 seasons with the Steelers, and in those 3 seasons, the Steelers went 14-17-1, winning 45% of the games and never making the playoffs. He's definitely a winner, all right. He was some winner that in 1945, the Steelers went 2-8, finishing dead last in their division, and finishing with the fewest points scored in the league and the worst point differential in the league. He's such a winner that literally the very first season he wasn't on the Steelers, they made it to the playoffs. Dudley then went on to the Detroit Lions, where he went 3-9 in 1947 and 2-10 in 1948, with the Lions boasting the worst record in the West in both seasons and the worst record in the NFL in 1948, although they did improve in his 3rd and final season in Detroit in 1949, when they shocked the football world by exceeding expectations and by going 4-8. He then finished his career playing 3 seasons in Washington, where he went 3-9 in 1950, 5-7 in 1951, and 6-5-1 in 1953. This incredible winner that Rooney was talking about played 9 seasons in the NFL. He had a losing record in 6 of them, and over his career, he went 37-65-2. His teams won an average of 4 games a season, emerged victorious roughly 35% of the time, and never made the playoffs. How was that a winner? Dudley was a really good player on bad teams who could not win games, and Rooney made him out to be a really bad player on good teams, so literally the exact opposite. If you said that Teddy Bridgewater and Michael Vick are very similar quarterbacks in terms of their play style, as wrong as you are, you would be more accurate than Rooney saying that Bill Dudley and Rick Trocano are similar players. Just to recap, Art Rooney compared Rick Trocano to a Hall of Famer by completely misremembering who the Hall of Famer was, and by saying that he couldn't play and couldn't throw a football. Again, can someone explain to me how this makes any sense? If your endorsement and your justification for drafting a guy is, we know he's not very good, then maybe you should draft him. Or maybe you need to come up with, literally any other reason. And it's not a huge surprise that Trocano didn't do anything in the NFL. He never played it down with the Steelers and wound up playing with the Cleveland Browns in 1981 and 1982, playing very minimal defensive back work. Even if it wasn't with the Steelers, and even if he didn't do anything, just the fact that he appeared in an NFL game, he actually appeared in 8 of them, makes him in the upper 40% of players drafted in the 11th round that year. So that's gotta count for something. But it's safe to say that how Trocano even got into the NFL in the first place is incredibly bizarre and incredibly stupid. Here's a word of advice for all head coaches and general managers trying to justify their picks to the press after. If you're going to compare them to a player, at least have the comparison make sense. In other words, don't say you drafted a halfback who runs a 4.9 40 because his speed reminds you of Chris Johnson. But most importantly, do not try to justify a draft pick by saying the man has no football skills whatsoever and is not a good player. Because drafting a quarterback by saying he has heart and then saying immediately after he can't throw is not the compliment that you think it is. If your logic for drafting a player is bless your heart, get different logic. Having heart is good, but having heart alone is not enough. And in 1981, the Steelers found this embarrassing lesson out the hard way. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.